Alright, hello everybody. Welcome to the other side of the wormhole. The lost thoughts of the But Why Though podcast, is what I like to call it, or basically what didn't make it in the episode. And today we're going to be doing episode 25, True Crime Matters. And we'll have our other lovely host of the But Why Though podcast, Kate.
Hi.
And yeah. And you took lead on this show, but I guess before we get into the show, I'll say, for everybody to know, like I said, this is basically what we talk about that we missed, and basically anything we answer, any questions and whatnot for YouTube and other such things. So make sure you listen to the podcast, and then you can come back and yell at us or something else, and we can correct ourselves or add to it and hear it. So after saying all that, Kate, take us away with the crime.
I didn't know I was leading this. This is your show. Oh God, I'm so unprepared.
You're not going to lead this thing. The point was, okay, why'd you want to do this episode?
Okay. Why I wanted to do this episode is one, so I work at a desk all day. So I listen to about 8 hours of podcasts a day if I can. And the bulk of it actually got into podcasts because I found a true crime podcast that I really liked. And I didn't feel weird because then when I went to a Facebook group. I went to their Facebook group and saw there was about 50,000 other people in that Facebook group who also liked hearing about crime and murder and all these things. So I know how big the community of true crime people are. And I also know like what true crime's done for me. Like it's helped me process my anxiety a lot. And I know that there have been some proven things with true crime psychologically on how it impacts or impairs how people deal with things, and specifically why women are drawn to true crime. So I think Adrian was at first was like, "You're weird," and then over the course of the episode, he was like, "Oh no, I'm the weird one," because the majority of people love true crime.
Yeah. And so I will start off by saying that a way to forget that we had a guest for this episode. I'd like to thank
And Brianna.
Thank Brianna from the Murder Dictionary podcast.
We have to thank Brianna. I talk to her every day. I apologize, Brianna. I love you. You know I love you. And you know I would gladly be adopted by you since they're trying to give me away.
Well, I don't know if she wants you anymore, if you completely forgot to thank her for coming on. So for those, after her nice spiel about why she liked true crime, yes, we'd like to thank
Well, that's what you asked me.
Well, yeah, you started off by saying, I'd like to say thank you, Brianna, for coming on from the Murder Dictionary podcast.
You're the host of this episode.
Yeah. Anyways, moving right along. Thanks again, Brianna. Take her away. We'll be fine with that. Yeah, keep nodding your eyes. See what happens. So, obviously, this one we did with, like, what is true crime? And so, I guess you obviously talked why you like true crime and why you want to do this episode. So, coming into this episode, I guess, let's say, why'd you go the way you went versus, I guess, some of the other, true crime podcasts that you listen to?
What do you mean?
Like, okay, was this like any of the true crime podcasts you listened to?
Oh, no. So the true crime podcast that I listened to, one, I didn't... Okay, so the majority of true crime podcasts are like maybe a little bit of rambling not rambling, but like, you know, talking with each other for like the first 5 minutes, and then they jump into giving you like the grisly details of a crime or two, or trying to solve unsolved crimes over like a 3-part series. The reason I didn't go that route of actually like putting true crime or putting a true crime case at the center, because I actually thought about it, was not everybody has a stomach for it. Obviously, Adrian doesn't, which is perfectly fine. And I didn't want to alienate some of our, you know, our constant listeners who may just not be comfortable listening to that stuff. So I decided to approach it from the point of, well, let's talk about what it is. And then my but why those and why it mattered was I wanted to circle it around the question that like Adrian asked me all the time. Why do you listen to death? And why do you like, you know, listening to these horrible things that happen to people and stuff like that? So I try to have it answer the question that a lot of true crime fans either internalize or we get from other people.
Okay. Yeah, so I know because I know you just kind of went through like what is true crime, the history. We talked about it in the shows. Looking at all these shows, was there any of them? Do you think you forgot any of them?
That I mentioned?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I forgot a whole bunch. I forgot like TV shows and stuff.
Yeah.
I've definitely forgot like a giant chunk of at least a lot of the true TV programming and like the ID programming and just like the Oxygen stuff, like totally left off. I think it was on your list and it was on mine too. The Dangerous Women or whatever.
Yes.
Left that one off.
Of course you did.
Also,
it's all about men killing women.
No, it's all about women killing men.
Yeah, I know what that show's about.
Opposite.
I know what true crime's about.
That was the opposite. Okay. Anyway, I also left out the fact that like the majority of like all of Lifetime's money is made off of reproducing true crime, like dramatization. So Casey Anthony, Amanda Knox, all those types of things. I left off all those shows. I left off the fact that Netflix has branched off into having an entire like true crime section that they're doing a lot of.
I completely forgot about Lifetime.
Yeah, I did too.
Yes,
like the majority of their money is made off of that.
Yes, watching a Lifetime movie is some spouse will be killed by the other spouse. We will not know what's going to happen, and eventually be found out by some other relative, usually a sister or a brother. Most likely
I'm not
sister.
even talking about like the fake ones. Like the
I
they've redone like.
I know that they've redone that, but I'm talking like all their fake ones seem to be the same generic formula.
Yeah, it's the same formula. But what I was saying, like when I said redone, like they haven't redone like the whole thing that you did. Like that stuff's still there. But I'm saying like they've had like multiple editions of like a famous like court case over and like there are like 10 different OJs and 10 different John Bonets and that's how Lifetime makes its money, is recreating these true crimes. So like it's different from like their fake movies with like that's always has like a stalker. If it's not like a couple, it's always like the crazy stalker. And they've like the bulk of their programming was always like, this really happened, so now we're going to show you. I think you had actually asked about that, like do these true crime podcasts like amplify or make like actively try to make women more afraid or sensationalize these things to make it look like they're happening at a higher rate or make women feel more afraid. And I would say Lifetime does. I would say Lifetime does big time. These true crime podcasts not so much, but it's because they come at it from a more like, even the comedy ones, they come at it from more of an intellectual level.
Comedy true crime podcast.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
Well, I'm sure they are, but this is like an oxymoron sometimes.
They're also really like, you don't recommend them to like last podcast on the left, which I think you would really love. You don't just like recommend that to somebody that you're like having coffee with, because they have probably some of the darkest humor I've ever heard.
So constantly going, since I kind of want to stick on the TV thing, looking at the TV shows, do you think there'd be, I mean, obviously cop TV is like huge and crime TV and whatnot, I guess depending on, I think the one point, we'll wait to get in that for a second, we'll start with TV. So looking at your list, Criminal Minds looks like it's pretty much on its way out. Murder, She Wrote's done, NYPD done, Bones is done, CSI done. I don't care about the other spin-off crap. It's done. NCIS, I don't want to say it's on its way out, but it's hard for me to watch these days because I don't think there might be two people out there. I think the original Law & Order, is that done or is that still going?
I can't remember. Last I remember, Anthony Anderson was on it, but I switched from Law & Order to like regular SVU on those damn 4th of July marathons.
SVU, I believe, is still going, even though...
Yeah, it's still going.
It is what it is these days, but yeah. So
it's actually gotten a lot better than it was last season. It was all that crazy stuff that you were like, this is stupid, this doesn't even make sense. They've kind of railed it back in a little bit. I guess the
point of the matter is, looking at these list of shows, I'm sure there might be some more out there that you know. Do you think they'll wrap up with a bunch more shows of these types coming or not?
I think so. I mean, these shows have been like Detective, like even if you look back to like the old Penny Dreadfuls when comics were first starting out in the 1800s, like it was always about detectives and crime and whodunits. And I think that's there is a morbid curiosity within every human. Even Adrian, as much as he like says he doesn't like this stuff, I mean, we want to know this. We want to know how people can do this, and we want answers. And I think true crime is probably the best genre for getting those answers. And crime television in general is a great way to do it. I mean, I like to live through Olivia Benson on SVU because she's badass. But at the same time, like a lot of that is ripped from actual crime.
Yeah, no, I just know, like I said, most of these are pretty much either on the way out or done, and I don't know actually what is actually in the pipeline coming up.
Yeah, so actually you have, I think it's either NBC or CBS, but they're building an entire world around Chicago Blue.
Well, I know they're building the whole Chicago
Law,
thing. Yeah.
You have Chicago Med, so like they're building an entire and Chicago Fire. So they're building an entire universe around that, and they're actually bridging that into SVU. I mean, even if you look at some of the other shows, I mean, technically, if you want to bring in like murder mystery or just mystery shows that deal with crime, Psych was a crime show. It was a funny crime show, but it was a crime show.
But that's also gone, though.
Yeah, that is gone. Honestly, I think if you actually look at like what's being made now or what's been announced, Oxygen has completely switched their entire programming to just be true crime.
How many people actually have the channel Oxygen, though?
I have no clue.
I was like, I honestly didn't know Oxygen still was around.
Well, I think, too,
quit moving.
It has to deal with people.
Keep cutting it farther out because you keep moving back.
Okay.
Okay.
I think it also has to do with people not having cable.
Right.
But Oxygen partnered with CrimeCon.
Okay.
That was in Indiana this past year, and CrimeCon had pretty enormous numbers.
I mean, I believe that.
So I think Oxygen was probably on its way out, but in switching to completely true crime, I think they're going to be pulling those numbers back, especially because I think the first show that they've announced is The Jury Speaks, and that's having to deal with juries on controversial cases and how they made those decisions and stuff. That being said, I think if we are on a way out of crime or cop television, we're on our way into actual true crime television again.
Okay.
Because like if you look at the late 80s, early 90s, it's also when you have like the high number of child abduction rates, or at least the high publicity of child abductions. You have obviously you have Adam Walsh, you have Johnny Gosch, you have some of the big names that we learn. And so you had this true crime wave in the 80s, early 90s, and then that shifts into crime television in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now I think we're going back to true crime because of the success with true crime podcasts. Well, there's a lot of money to be made there. I think My Favorite Murder makes like $14,000 a month or something like that on Patreon. So same thing with last podcast on the left. And yeah, so it's kind of like, and honestly, the most successful Patreons that I see are true crime Patreons. And so I think that the industry is realizing, hey, if people are tuning into podcasts, they can tune into a show. That's obviously what Netflix has realized.
So the most interesting question going from there, since these are becoming so popular, do you think the rise in crime will then go up?
No.
You don't think murder or anything will actually go back up?
No. I don't. I think it stays pretty constant. I think the fact that we've had a fascination with really sensationalized murder, so like the Criminal Minds and the SVU and the Law and Orders, I think that would probably increase the things of stuff going up, because with true crime, you actually see that these things don't work. Versus the other ones where you have that one bad guy who's running around for 20 episodes and comes back in 2 seasons because he's out doing these things. Like, it's not sensationalized or glamorized for the most part. For the most part, there are places that do. But I don't think I'll have the rise in murder. I don't think that would happen. I also think that we live in a society now that's highly monitored, and that's why the murder rate has gone down overall since the 90s. So...
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
The government could be lying to us. There could be murders everywhere. But anyways, but one of the
actually, so The only scary thing is not, and it's the one type of crime that I don't like listening to is spree killers.
Mm-hmm.
So spree killers and mass murderers, and these are different than serials because serials are spread over, months, years. There's a cooling off period. Sprees and mass usually happen in quick succession. Mass is all in one place. Spree is in a variety of places, but usually with no cooling off period in between the kills. Those two crimes actually really increase the likelihood of copycats. So we're talking like your school shooters. I can't remember that guy's name, but that guy in California who was a cop and was like treated really crappily by the other like racists on the force and like went through and killed people. Like those types of things inspire copycats versus say like a Dahmer or like the stuff that these true crime things are actually focusing on, because we are getting more true crime movies now too. Manson was just announced by Tarantino. Zac Efron's going to be playing Ted Bundy, and then there's also one called My Friend Dahmer coming out. But I think the media does a pretty good job at sensationalizing mass killings already. So the rate will probably stay the same.
So we go from TV. One thing that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get to talk about was the difference between horror versus true crime.
Yeah. So I love horror and I love true crime. I am what people expect. But not every horror fan loves true crime because like Adrian said, like he can watch a lot of the stuff that I mentioned, like The Hills Have Eyes, Psycho, like a lot of our favorite scary movies are actually informed by real psychopaths. And a lot of people can watch the horror but can't hear about the real things because then all of a sudden, oh my God, it can happen. I know that this really happened. Or they just don't want to hear happening to real people. That being said,
reality hit.
Pretty much, people die. People get murdered. That happens. But on the other side of that, you also have the fact that people who listen to true crime and people who watch true crime, as much as we listen and watch, we don't really have, like, not everything has crime scene photos. Not everything has graphic reenactments. So not every true crime fan is going to be ready to watch the type of gore that's involved with horror. That and the majority of true crime, you know how it's going to end. There are no like twists and jump scares.
Yeah, which is actually funny because I think I forgot. That's what I went to. I think you talked about something else I mentioned. I want to know how you feel. I hate shows. I don't know how many movies per se have done this, but I know I've seen the SVU done it a few times. Probably Criminal Minds, I'm sure, have done it. I believe Bones has done it. Maybe. I know CSI definitely done it. NCIS maybe. Law & Order probably a few times. This whole ordeal where they literally do not give you a verdict and they just say, dun dun, and the show ends for you to decide.
Oh, that annoys me. That annoys the living hell out of me.
It drives me insane, and I hate it. Like, I just do not even want to watch your show anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why they do that, I guess, other than to drive people, I guess, like you and I, insane, but I can't.
No closure. Ever.
Yeah, I know there are movies that sometimes end in the most weirdest ways like that, but it's more of like, what just happened? Where all of a sudden, like, everybody actually ended up dying, and you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah. But, well, like, the funny thing is, too, like, even with, like, Zodiac, that movie with, what's his face? Yeah, with Jake Gyllenhaal. That's actually a really good movie. They came up with their own theories. Like, they didn't just leave you like, oh, we don't know who Zodiac is. Like, we'll try to fill it in.
Well, at least that one, since it was based off of basically a story that had, no closure, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I guess, like, when you're on a TV show and they're like, oh, you can decide, dun dun, and then end the show, it's like, really? Like, give me something. It's almost like a cop-out, too, because usually when they do it, it's usually something that's very highly controversial that they...
Yeah, like, we don't want to make a moral judgment on this.
Yeah.
We'll keep our viewers on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. And probably another reason, like, don't do that. Don't cop out. If you're gonna do it, pick a side. Don't stand in the middle. But, yeah, there are a few movies, I think, that end like that, where the end up the, I can't even think of one off the top of my head. The only one I can really think of is Saw, the first one, ended up like that, which was awesome.
Yeah, I also think, too, like, as much as it ended it like that, like that movie was twists and turns from the beginning. So like you knew something was going to happen. You didn't know that was going to happen. But you were expecting something weird to happen. Like it wasn't just going to be a cut and dry movie.
Yeah,
not with the type of like, psychological mind
games. Yeah, that made sense. But I mean, I'm sorry. I don't know why. They are making a new Saw. I guess that's why one of the reasons why I saw that Saw preview for the new Saw, which looks awful.
It's called Jigsaw.
Anyway, kill it off. Ugh. First Saw. Instant classic for everybody out there. Amazing movie, great. Anything after that, I'm sorry, it was awful. Money grabs. And they started releasing them on Halloween.
Yeah, well, I think too, like Saw actually starts that revival of torture porn. That Hostel picks up off of. So you have the original Saw that comes out and it brings back that ultra violence, and then you have like the entire string of movies right after that focus on it. This isn't saying that like Cannibal Holocaust was happening way before Saw. But you have like this modern cinema picking up on like the torture porn aspect, and that comes from Saw
also
too.
For the most part, for everybody out there, I think I might have mentioned it. Hostels, from everybody I heard, are not that bad. You're not gonna end up in like human trafficking.
We're never gonna stay in a hostel because I know I'm gonna die in it, and I'm not ready for that.
Well, you might as well get over it. Then you better become when they hit the lottery because hostels save so much money. They're not that bad. If people can stay on them in various countries and they make it back, they'll be fine. Not to say that nothing bad happens, but statistically speaking...
Which, by the way, the first Hostel's good. Don't watch anything after that.
That seems to be also a common thread, or theme.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you name the serial killers on the screen right now?
I'd have to go look at the screen. Probably not. No.
Okay.
No.
I just want to know. Like, not even one?
I mean, I'm sure there's Dahmer in there somewhere.
Dahmer is in there.
Yeah, I think he's one of the only ones in color, if I remember correctly. Or
yes.
Yeah. I think that's I don't know. There looks like an Escobar in there, but that's not an Escobar.
No! Just because he's brown does not mean his last name's Escobar.
No, just look at him. He's got a round face and everything, too.
Well, he is a Latino serial killer, but he's not Escobar.
I feel like he killed a lot of people, so...
He did. He did, actually. So... He has one of the highest kill counts.
Yeah, so I couldn't have been that wrong.
In fact... Okay, so the one you're calling Escobar, he... was stopped by the police, sat on the police car. In his statement said that he prayed to Satan, and Satan shielded him and made his face different for the cops so that he didn't get stopped. Because this is after they already have in circulation these pictures of him from the people that had survived, because he used to break into people's homes and murder them in their sleep. Usually murder the wife while the husband watched, and there's like sexual assault stuff in there. But anyway, yeah. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
Ramirez Escobar wasn't that far off.
It's pretty close, yeah. No,
and the besides, one on the far... I picked somebody that at least murdered a bunch of people. I didn't just pick a random generic name.
You did. Yeah, no, I honestly would say that Pablo Escobar is pretty scary. I also know that Richard Ramirez is probably the one serial killer that I am extremely terrified of. Like, just as an idea, like, he didn't have a type. He literally killed from like ages, I think 9 was his youngest victim, all the way up to like old ladies. And he killed both men and women. And it was just really insane. So like, you know how in Criminal Minds, they talk about how like serial killers have that de-evolution once they start escalating. The weird thing with Richard Ramirez was he was constantly in this pattern of de-escalation. Like he was always everywhere. So that actually made him hard to catch. But
that's why I'm also fascinated with the movie Mr. Brooks. I love that movie.
I actually think I can't remember that movie that much.
With Kevin Costner.
Oh, no, I do remember that movie. Okay.
And a shitty Dane Cook.
Dane Cook's always shitty though.
Yes.
Is there ever a good Dane Cook?
No, but Dane Cook is definitely an idiot in that movie.
Okay. Once again, is there ever a smart Dane Cook?
No, I mean, he got Jessica Alba in the movie with the penguins or whatever.
That's pretty smart. But yeah, so the one on the far right's Myra Hindley. She's from the UK. They killed teenage girls. She was part of a duo. Right next to that is Ted Bundy, the Chi Omega killer in Florida, which apparently you cannot mention the Ted Bundy. I think it's like at Florida State or something, which is where that happened. Whatever's in Tallahassee. You know Florida. I don't.
Florida State.
Florida State, yeah. You can't mention Ted Bundy around the sorority houses, or you will lose your like frat hood if you do that. Because during his de-escalation, he broke into a sorority house and killed like 5 women. Then it's Richard Ramirez. Next is also probably one of the most famous, John Wayne Gacy. 33 kills. They were all kids and like teenage boys. Next is Eileen Wuornos, probably the most well-known female serial killer. Her kill count 7, all men, who she claims attacked her. Like, she never accepts responsibility for the murders. And then you have Ed Kempner, the co-ed killer, right after that, who is active as the same time as the earthquake killer in California, who killed people because he believed that... John Rifkin. He believed that by killing people, the earthquake would not happen because he was born on like the anniversary of the Great San Francisco Fire. And then Dahmer, who tried to turn people into zombies.
The fascination, the fascination with either Satan with their killings, or like, you know, saving for earthquake, or all the lovely stories we hear about people murdering their children in bathtubs because Jesus, or they're possessed, or some weird shit, is fascinating. And one, how many occurrences it actually has, even though they're probably very statistically low. But the fact that there are, I guess, way more than one.
Yeah. Well, I think, too, because it has to go with the fact that, like, how do I say? As somebody who suffers from mental illness, I am not saying that everybody with mental illness is a serial killer. That being said, the majority of serial killers do suffer from frontal lobe damage, and there are a lot of violent outbursts from people with schizophrenia who have completely devolved, and this is where you get people who kill for earthquakes, or I think it's Vincent Lee in Canada killed a guy and chopped a guy's head in the back of the bus and started eating him. Like, there are issues where the mental health system fails people, and sometimes this happens. And angels and visions of God are like really constant with schizophrenia. And then it's just like this idea that we've put so much into evil being the devil and God being good, that if you're trying to justify something, you're saying it's for God. And a lot of the times, like, they, like, some of them will attribute it to Satan if they're just like completely psychotic, like freaking Richard Ramirez. And then a lot of the times Satanism gets attributed to them. So like usually if it's a psychotic break, then you have them doing it themselves. And then, yeah.
Which is actually interesting that was in Canada. I guess that's early because from what I don't know about Canadian now, but I thought,
that was in 2008.
Because I want to say, I don't know, I swear Canada had a better health system, mental health system. Obviously, pretty much everybody does in the U.S. at this point. It seems like, but
they have it, but you have to seek it. So they still run into the problem with what happens when somebody refuses to take their meds.
Right.
Which actually, that guy is out and living in a city now on probation because Canada believes in, or parole. Canada believes in rehabilitation for reentry into the world, specifically what it has to do with mental health. So Canada will almost always never give somebody life in prison, regardless of the heinous nature of their crime, if they're suffering from a documented mental illness.
Yeah, well, I know even in Europe, put it this way, besides America, we just like to jail everybody. Everybody lives in jails, but
yeah, we kill you if your IQ's at 65 here in Texas. So,
well, you say that, but there's still a lot of Texans. So, but yeah, no. At least for the mental health state, from at least what I've seen, the rehabilitation from the prison system, one is non-existent, obviously, in the U.S. at all, pretty much.
Yeah.
And just from other countries, it seems to be the goal is, like I said, rehabilitation versus, I guess, incarceration. So that's why I was wondering about Canada, because I was like, I'm pretty sure they had a system in place where people, you know, and obviously they don't keep people in prison that long.
Yeah, I don't remember the complete like breakdown of what happened to him. I don't think a lot of the facts actually came out towards that, but he did have a schizophrenic break, and then Canada released him. I think it was either early this year or last year that he's actually out now and living in an actual community, not a community for like people with mental illness or old criminals, like in an actual community. And there was a big uproar because his crime was bad.
Right.
Really freaking bad. But Canada actually cares about your mental health and won't hold it against you if you do that. Because obviously, like, I'm not giving a pass to somebody who drowns their 5 kids in a bathtub or somebody who does what Vincent Lee did. But there is something where, like, would this person have done it if they had had the adequate help? Had they been medicated? All these types of things. So Europe and Canada tend to actually try to give them a chance.
Yeah, because I think I saw the other day where literally at one of the European, I want to say it's Switzerland, I could be wrong, but they're literally they have so many prisons with nobody in them that they're turning them into like cheap hotels.
Pretty much.
They're like, come stay at a prison for a night. It's going to be like 40, I guess, euros, if that. And yeah, it's obviously not to be the most comfy thing, but yeah. Whereas in here, we're just building more and more prisons.
Yep, and they're all privatized here in Texas.
Yeah. But anyways, I know we talked about it on the show. I thought about it for a while, and I still see it here. I guess I still don't understand. Obviously, it's just hard, because obviously it is what it is. I still don't understand why the negative connotation for prostitute versus sex worker.
So I
still think sex worker sounds way worse than prostitute.
Yeah, no, and I mean, even Brianna brought it up when she was talking about it. She said that like she works in a sex shop, and the women who are sex workers that come to her, they prefer to be called prostitute. They, right. They prefer to be called hooker, all these things. But the reason, and I looked it up after we talked with her. So true crime as a genre has chosen to take on the term sex worker. Because it removes so I actually don't think it sounds worse. To me, it sounds like somebody who's going to work. I think all of them sound like somebody who's going to work. Because it's a new term in our consciousness, really, it doesn't have all the same negative connotations like prostitute, hooker, just all of these other things, porn star. Porn star is probably not as bad, but with these words that get attributed to victims because that was the way they lived their life, or that was the work that they chose or were forced into, they become, a lot of people use that, and the media does a really good job at this, to dehumanize them and make it so that you don't care what happened to them. It's the reason why I think there was this one killer who killed something like in the 30s of black prostitutes. And nobody cared because they were prostitutes. They went missing. Nobody cared. The police didn't care. It's the same thing with like drug addicts. So you have this negative connotation, and by trying to switch up the language, true crime creators are trying to rehumanize them for people who have had them dehumanized this entire time. So it's kind of like by introducing you to this word and giving you a new background to it, hopefully you can build a link and empathy to these victims that we're talking about, because a lot of true crime is focused. I know I just gave a rundown on serial killers, but a lot of true crime is actually focusing on the victims and how they live their lives, and not the consequences, but the confluence of stuff that was around them that actually led to their death. And a lot of the times it has to do with broken families. It has to do with law enforcement not doing their job. There's a lot that goes into it. And so by removing words that we've constantly used to shame women who use sex to make their living, it's an attempt to negate that. I get what you're saying. I personally am not bothered by the word prostitute. But
I'm more bothered by the word sex worker. I really think of human trafficking and like basically trafficking of people and like selling of people.
So you think of it. So you don't think of it. So you don't think of it as like the actual person doing the work. You think of it as a person who's making somebody do the work.
Yeah.
Okay. That would be a sex trafficker.
Well, I know what it
and
is, but I'm still telling you.
They're probably too close together to
me,
like actually separate them.
To me, just sex worker does not sound like somebody who, I don't know, I guess, I don't know, it just doesn't sound like, when you say sex worker, it sounds like somebody that really is having sex not because they want to or anything, or even to make money, but they're almost forced to and they get money, or even anything else, or they're some way. I
can see that, but I can also make the argument that being forced into prostitution is the same thing. A lot of prostitutes would love to go sit in an office job, but they can't. They're kind of forced by their circumstance to use sex to make money. I think I see what you're saying, and it honestly might just be because I've been exposed to the word for so long that I just know the first time I heard it, I didn't think it was bad. I've never had that connotation with it. But it does sound really close to the idea of a sex trafficker, who would be like the
sex
person
worker
who
sounds
sells
like you have
women.
a boss.
That's usually what happens.
Well, I mean, I know.
Like, but... I think the thing is too, like, sex worker also has a connotation of the system that these women are working in. It's the idea that they are doing work. They're doing work because they have to do this work. They're doing work because this is what life is for them. Whereas, like, you can say, oh, she's a prostitute, she does what she wants, she's free, she's this. I also think sex worker does allow you to talk about the other side, like you're saying, that some of these women do have a boss. A lot of sex workers are killed by their pimps. Like that's a reality of it, and I think that also gets talked about. So it's a reality of it. I just think that we've used the word, at least from what I read, and I agree with it, which is why I'm using is that, like, we've used the word prostitute and hooker to shame people for so long that it makes it really, or we've sensationalized those words, that people just think, well, they had it coming. What did they expect? We shouldn't care about them. We should just move on. We shouldn't search for them. I honestly don't think there's a good term for everybody overall. I mean, obviously, like, actual prostitutes don't like the word sex worker, according to Brianna. And I think it is important.
I think more than like anything else.
I also don't think a lot of these true crime podcasters are out there talking to, like, other than Brianna. And then even she said she uses the term sex worker, even though she does actually have these conversations with prostitutes. But that's the shift that true crime has made. They have chosen this term, and the true crime community has embraced the term and said that, no, this is a better term because it rehumanizes these people. But if you really want to humanize them, you do what Brianna on Murder Dictionary does, and you don't even mention the fact that they are prostitutes unless it's pertinent to the crime.
Yes.
She focuses on the people. She doesn't focus on what they did because it's their job. Like, if I got murdered tomorrow, they're not going to be like, she was a sales developer researcher at so-and-so company. Like, they're not going to say that about me because it's not important. They might. But, like, focus on them as people. And a lot of the times, at least in the media, when a woman's profession, specifically, it has to do in the... And I think the reason they have sex worker, Matt, is because you have sex industry. Which would be like dancers, porn stars, adult film stars would probably be the better word. They all fall into the sex industry. Not all of them have sex, but so that's probably, like, it probably goes hand in hand, like sex worker, sex industry, like you're a worker in the industry of sex. But yeah, a lot of the times when the media talks about people who are in the sex industry, it's really negative. Like when Christy Mack was brutally tortured, sexually assaulted, and held captive in her home, the only thing the media reported when it first came out was that she was a porn star. And that's not what you do. And so I think that they're trying to find a term that doesn't automatically make people dehumanize these victims. Whether it's working or not, I don't know. I think you're right. I think they should probably listen to the women and men who are in this line of work and use what they want to be called. but that's at least like the reasoning behind it, because at least from what I read, but I don't know if it'll change. It might be changing. I don't know. I know all the podcasts I listen to use sex worker instead.
I don't know. Yeah. I will not use it.
It's okay. That's fine. But like, do you at least get like the industry worker thing? Like, it's known as the sex industry. Like, that's what it's called. Like, that entire like part of selling sex for money or doing sexual acts for money, or like even selling toys. Sex toys means you're a part of the sex industry. Like, it's weird. I don't know. Language sucks sometimes, especially when you're trying to make people care. I think all podcasts should just not talk about it unless it's pertinent to it. Like, that's probably what they should do.
So since we go here and they talk about it, since you brought up Criminal Minds earlier, at what point do you draw the line of, I'm trying to think what the damn name they use for it is, of between, I'm trying to think the behavior, but I guess risk, behavior, risk factoring. At what point do you get to where we draw a line of
like high risk and low risk?
Yes, there we go. So what, I guess, where would you draw the line here? Because you're talking about basically, because you're like, oh, well, people don't care about these people, but then if you do it from a statistical standpoint, you are putting yourself in a more high risk environment.
Yeah, well, the idea is that, like, just because somebody is in a high-risk environment, like me walking home at night is a high-risk environment. I may not live a high-risk lifestyle, but me walking home at night by myself without any protection is a high-risk activity for a woman.
Yeah, no, but the odds of rolling the dice at a high risk will also mean there's higher chance of anything happening.
Exactly. But the thing is, you can say that they did. So you could say that they did live a high risk lifestyle, but that doesn't mean that they deserved it.
Well,
and
I know.
I think
I'm just asking,
but this is where it changes.
I know where we draw the line at where versus.
Like where it switches from high risk to low risk, or where it switches from when you should acknowledge it.
Yeah, I guess we'll go from like, not necessarily deserving, but you go to acknowledging that, hey, this person probably should have not done.
Yeah. So I think what you can do there, and I think some podcasts have done it. So I think Gary Ridgway like only killed prostitutes. And what one of the podcasts that I listened to did, they said this guy preyed on people who would not be missed. That means that he preyed on people who were thought to live or engage in risky behavior. He preyed on people who he knew that if they went missing, nobody would know. This includes homeless. This includes drug addicts. This includes prostitutes. People that couldn't go to the cops. All that is, and I think you can address that, yes, this person targeted risky people, like people living high risk lives because they're easier targets.
Well, obviously.
But I think, yeah. And I think that is very different than saying like what the media does a lot of the time, or what the comment section does is this person lived a high risk life. What did they expect? Oh, well, like right. The difference is framing it to say that, yes, this is a life that they were in, but you shouldn't just say, oh, well, and you shouldn't just say they deserved it. And you shouldn't just say like they are still people and they still deserve the same justice as like the suburban mom who gets like assaulted while running around her neighborhood. Like they still deserve that same justice.
Speaking of that, I see all these all the time, and I know Lifetime, one of their favorite thing to do, I guess as an avid whatever heck runner person, how are people being attacked so much while running?
So
I mean,
you want me to get? So I can give you like the breakdown.
I know there's some complicated, and some people do some crazy stuff, but like for the most common part or general, I know obviously movie or show do it terribly portrayed. I just don't see how people are getting like attacked or not realizing or paying attention enough when you are running to see anything.
Well, do you want to know like the actual the minds from like? So I can give you it from two perspectives. So Jeffrey Dahmer actually targeted people who, like, the first person that, before he killed anybody, his first victim, he wanted to be this guy who ran all the time. He knew where the path started. He knew where it ended. So he knew that at the end of the path, he was going to be at his tiredest. And so he showed up one day to the end of the path to assault him by surprise because he's been watching this guy for a while. That guy ends up not going to run that day, and that guy ends up surviving, and then Jeffrey Dahmer switches his MO right after that. And then you switch, there's a story out of California from a woman who went running. She saw somebody at the first mile marker, and it was a loop.
Right.
It was about 6 miles, I think. And when she was coming back around, she noticed the exact same person standing in the exact same spot who looked like he was waiting for her. So she fucking booked it off a freaking cliff.
Yeah.
And like ran away because she could.
Well,
but the thing is,
the second story is more of like what I understand. Like, people, you should notice this stuff. Like I said, I'm not saying all of them. Like the first example you gave, yeah, that makes a lot more sense and whatnot and what thing.
Yeah.
But at least what I portrayed and how it is definitely in TV and whatnot, it's usually the second version, and I don't understand how that happens or seems to be portrayed all the time.
I think the majority of the time when that happens, because that was actually happening here in Austin, in North Austin area, it happens on dimly lit trails. Like, that's honestly like the only answer that I can say. Like, I think then that girl actually said, like, one of the reasons she got away was because it was really lit. She was training for something longer, so she had the stamina to run away,
right.
And she was aware of her surroundings. Now, if that path had been dark, and if she was in mile like 10 instead, there's really not a lot you can do there. So it honestly is a lot of luck on the perpetrator's part. Like, you have to hope that that person is tired so they can't run away faster, because obviously if they're running out, I run and I'm not fit, but like usually if they're running a long path or they're running, there is some level of fitness there. But at the same time, look at when we run. We have to run when we get home from work or before we go to work, and both of those are potentially dark times. And so when you run like that, you don't always know the path. Like, I mean, you've said it before, like there have been some old ladies walking around in our neighborhood in like black clothes, and you don't know they're there, and they move and they like freak you out. It's those types of things that I would say is probably most common. At least I know in Austin, like in the north side where the sexual assaults are happening, that was the case. Central Park 3 is pretty similar. And then if you just the medical, I think it's like the medical center rapist or something in San Antonio, it's all about catching people in the dark, and usually like by surprise. Like, that's all it is.
I usually don't run in the dark. I mean, I think you say that, but I think we've only ran maybe once, and it was usually when it was already being dawn. It was already like the sun was going down. It was up when we started, but going down when we started.
That's what I'm saying though too. Like, we also don't work until 6 o'clock at night. Like, if you're an avid runner, but you also have to have like a day job, you have to make the sacrifice to run at different times, or you, like the people running along Lake Austin at like 6 a.m.
That means you go to work at 10, which means you could probably run at 7.
Not in Austin. You could go, okay. No, I mean, if you don't think that people should be attacked, or like you don't understand how they're attacked, I'm trying to explain it to you. I mean, the majority of the times it happens at night.
Well, I'm telling you, there are ways to be avoiding running at night.
There's always a way to avoid being killed. It doesn't mean that, like, it's not going to happen.
Okay.
I mean, like, I just think, like, the people who run at, like, 6 a.m. when we're, like, driving on, like, Austin or whatever, like, a lot, like, depending on the time of year, it's really dark then.
Those people would mess you up if you tried to attack them.
Okay.
Have you seen those people?
They would. No, I have. They would.
Like,
all I know is that
I'm not saying
these people are predators a lot of the time, and there's a reason that like women aren't supposed to wear like what do you call it, like ponytails and stuff when they know they're going to be walking alone for like an extended distance and stuff like that, because it's easier to grab. You're not supposed to look at your phone. Headphones are a no unless you have, if you have them all the way turned up, like that kind of stuff. Just because like. Specifically with sexual assaults, like these people aren't about self-gratification, they're about power. And with that comes this idea of predator prey. And with that, like, there's a lot of stuff they think about that we won't. Like, you can prepare yourself for all those outcomes, and you just need one wrong thing to happen. And bam.
Okay.
I mean, like, does that not make sense?
Oh, it makes sense. I never said it didn't.
I think it's also different from, like, you running. where like you have super quick reflexes and then like me running. I don't have quick reflexes and I'm not as fast. Like for all we know, like that person passed up like the 5 other runners who went before him because they were all really fast and he didn't think that he could attack them and went for like a one little rhino at the end. Like
that's just called biology. But yes. We talked about it on Shark Week. The poor little seal gets a thing in the penguins.
Yep. All I know is that, like, crime will find a way. And a lot of the times you have to do stuff. Like, I didn't like walking home at night by myself, but I had to go to LSAT classes that only ran from 7 to 9. So I had to walk home by myself at night. But I also took precautions just in case. I have been followed at night before. It's scary. Like, especially for smaller women. Like tiny ones.
You a tiny little one?
I got little legs. They don't carry me that fast.
You got to bumpity bump your tricep around, triceratops around. Okay, so moving through here, we talk about Brianna. Is there anything you feel we missed? Obviously, I know you could talk about the subject for hours. I know you do on Twitter all day long.
I do. No, I mean, the big thing is just like, being a person of color in true crime sucks. Pretty bad, at least at the moment. It's highlighted because one of the largest true crime podcasts has been really shitty towards their fans of color. Because a lot of the time, one of the things you'll see that happens when you listen to true crime is they'll focus on a lot of like, they'll focus on the murder, but when it comes to actually how it's tried or the possibility of hate crime, stuff like that, like they're not really open to investigating it. And a lot of it may just be because it's out of their depth, but there are like, so Murder Dictionary welcomes it, Court Junkie welcomes it, so does It's About Damn Time. Like a lot of podcasts have an open forum that like, okay, we want to hear your interpretations of this crime and we want to hear the evidence that you use to come to that idea. Now, what happened in the My Favorite Murder threads is a lot of time those ideas were getting they weren't even being allowed to be voiced by the moderators. And then stuff happened. So, like, that's the only thing I think we missed.
So, I don't know exactly what happened, but what I do want to know, so, based on this, was the original crime ever anything predicated or ever thought, charged, or predicated, whatever, looked at as a hate crime? And then B, when they were being ignored, was it people like saying this should be a hate crime because of A, B, and C?
Yeah, so the majority of the time, at least in for a lot of true crime posts, will say, this is my thought on this. This is my thought process of it. Okay. Because they want to have, like, the true crime community really wants to find out how these things happen, why they happened, and have like actual like discussions on theory and stuff like that. So a lot of people do back up their evidence. It's not just like, it's racism. It's like, no, it's racism because this guy could have killed the 10 other people. He killed the black family and he left this, that, and that, like those types of things. On top of that, so they were getting ignored for a lot of that. What was the first question?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming these were based off original crimes, correct?
Yeah. So the weird thing with hate crimes is you can have something that's obviously a hate crime, but it's not necessarily prosecuted as a hate crime because of, so like a Klansman can go kill a person of color, but if in that act of murder doesn't declare his hate of that individual, it would be hard. Like if it wasn't like a Klan staged lynching or something like that.
Okay. So I get the whole jury part of that. What I'm saying,
there's murky lines, and it's not just jury; it's actual like prosecution. So a lot of the times,
I know, I'm talking about, not talking about the prosecution, the jury, or anything. I'm talking about like literally you're talking about in that example. From a public standpoint, you could make a case based on the thing. That's what I'm asking. Do these things are these things like that, or these are just like randomized? Dahmer happened to kill somebody. that dude's white, that dude's black, or that dude.
Yeah.
That
well, Dahmer actually has racism in it because he only chose minority victims, and I think 2 of them were actually returned to him after escaping by the cops because they trusted his word over the little Asian guys. That is a space where you need to talk about the racial implications of that. And I guess like it's not necessarily just calling it a hate crime, but talking about the racial implications in the system and how the system actually fails this group of people. That also would get left out of the conversation or rejected from the conversation. When if you look at Dahmer, like that is a case where like that is what happens. And in a lot of true crime cases, you do choose the people who won't be looked at. And a lot of the time, it's like you can steal a little brown girl away. She's not on 10 million milk cartons. It's like that type of thing. And so like a lot of the time it gets brought up in a really good way. So because I mentioned it in the episode, a lot of true crime fans have been really working to be active in changing the justice system and pointing out its failures and pointing out how to make it better, how to train people to make it better. But in this conversation, we also need to talk about race. But at least in my favorite murder in that group and with the hosts themselves, it felt like they were refusing to talk about that. They would talk about everything else, but would not talk about that and would not apologize when people ended up getting called really racist crap in the comments while bringing this up. And that's a problem.
The only question I do have about that is, one, yeah, that probably sucks and they probably should bring it up. I don't know what their, the original thing of like, we just don't want to bring this up versus that. And 2, I mean, I guess they can apologize.
So
I guess the whole point I don't understand is like, why are you mad at them?
What did you want them to do?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
like
that's where I'm getting.
Yeah,
at. I'm like, so if somebody goes crazy, why am I supposed to apologize for them?
Well, no, okay. So at first, what happened was you have this group, and it's been happening since it was open, where a lot of talks about race are being pushed out or silenced. That's the background for this, right? This is what happens. Then you have a woman of color in the group say, hey, a lot of us don't feel like we can voice our opinions on these matters here because we get shut down, because nobody discusses with us, and because people just, call us racist names. That's not okay. I'm going to make a side group just for LGBT people as well as people of color to come join, where we can actively discuss these issues of institutionalized of racial undertones in these crimes in the institution itself. So like a nice space to actually talk about this with other people who are interested in talking about this. And this is exclusive. And this is for people. This is a group made by people of color for people of color. That being said, the My Favorite Murder group has like 50 different offshoots. There's like a Murderino Gardening Club and a Murderino Baker Club. I'm not like exaggerating. These are actual like mini groups within this. Like this is always done. So it's not like they were breaking something here. And then a whole bunch of people in the thread started being really racist to them. And then it was like, see, this is why we need it. And then the mods refused to do anything to the people being racist and kicked out the people who were trying to defend themselves and make this space, kicked them out of the group instead of actually doing it to the other people. And then in this group, they called them out and said, hey, this isn't cool. And then it spiraled out of control. And then there's this Twitter called Stay Sexy, Don't Be Racist, because the tagline for My Favorite Murder is Stay Sexy, Don't Get Murdered. And it was listing why the POC group needed to be created and how Georgia and Karen could respond, because up until this point, the group was not holding Georgia and Karen in charge of their crazy fans. Like, you can't do that. Like, if a fan says something, that's not the host doing it, right? Then, instead of reading the thread, Karen, who is a host, corrected a hashtag that was on there, because they put the hashtag our favorite murder instead of my favorite murder. And so instead of engaging in the conversation, because I mean, we've been called out before, like engage with the conversation, talk about it. If it goes somewhere, it goes somewhere. She corrected their grammar and didn't interact past that. That was it. Did not listen to anything that was said. And then Georgia, who's the other host, sent personal messages to some of the women in the group who had been kind of leading this charge and had received a bulk of the harassment and targeting. And we're like, we're so sorry. We want to listen. What can we do? We need to be better. And it actually came off pretty heartfelt. Then they ended up putting a statement in the group, and it was pretty much just saying, respect the mods. Like that was the gist of it. The main thing was, guys, don't be racist in our community. We support all of our fans. Takeaway, don't be ugly to the mods. Volunteer yourself. That's it. So it went from being a genuine message to a just get out of here type thing.
Well, I don't see how that's a get out of here when it just...
Okay, well, not a get out of here, but like... So the problem was the mods, and that's the thing. Like, it was kind of like, we're going to side with our mods over the group of 600 people telling us that this is what the mods are doing badly.
Well, I will say, I mean, it doesn't sound great, but I will say, at least they said volunteer, you can be a mod.
They did.
So that.
And then, and a lot of but the thing is some of these women had actually tried to be mods before and they were denied. So that's where it becomes a slap in the face too. So like up until right after this happened, there were no people of color as mods. It was all white women as mods. That was it. And then right after this, they added one woman of color. And then, I mean, it's pretty much just gone nowhere. They still haven't addressed it on the actual show. And this is another thing that's frustrating. And I think why I personally have stopped listening is because Karen and Georgia were really open to, hey, don't use this word. That's derogatory. Use this one. They even had a thing called Corrections Corner where they went over all the stuff that they pissed people off about. And they actually put on the face that they were going to try and change and try to better themselves along with this process because they understand the problems in the system. But when it came to race, they wouldn't do it. They did it for the LGBT plus community. They did it for derogatory terms against like women and homeless and like all these other things. They would gladly accept blame or at least acknowledge that not because like nobody was calling Karen and Georgia racist. They were saying, Karen and Georgia, you're being problematic by not addressing what's happening. We need you to stand with us the same way you do everybody else. And the fact that that podcast itself had made its goal to do that, and then they didn't for a very select group, that's what made it look really bad. And that's why there's a lot of anger towards the host now, versus like that's how it got to the point of the host being involved. So like the hosts aren't blamed for what happened initially. The hosts are like only blamed for their actions. The biggest one is just Karen being completely dismissive and correcting somebody's grammar and not actually listening to what's being said. That was the big one. So, yeah. I think I missed some stuff, but that's like the overall nutshell. There's a lot of drama. It's a really complicated issue, but pretty much the Stay Sexy, Don't Be Racist Twitter is collecting the receipts for all the stuff that's happened still. I think they're at like 50, I think there's like 500 entries so far. So.
Should be interesting.
Yeah. It's just, it's weird. It's, yeah. It's just a fact. Like for me, the most annoying thing is that they engaged with everything else, but didn't engage here. That was kind of like, really? You've done this before. You've been called worse than what, you know, these people are actually like, we're actually trying to open a discussion with you. People actively got like excessively angry at you before. And you responded to them. But that's kind of like the biggest thing. So, yeah. I mean, it's not going to matter in the long run. Like, they're still going to make $14,000 a month on Patreon, and they're still going to have giant numbers, and they're still going to get new followers every day. But that is kind of like a subset of it too, because a lot of the podcasters, so a lot of true crime podcasters are actually female, but a lot of those true crime podcasters are white women, and they tend to focus on like white crime. And then a lot of the men tend to only focus on the heavy hitters, so like only serials versus like smaller crimes, or like they focus on celebrities and stuff like that. But you have It's About Damn Crime, who they're two minority women that focus solely on crimes that were committed by minorities. There's a stereotype, right, that only like white men are serial killers, and the majority of the time that's true. But then you have Richard Ramirez, you have the zebra killings, you have like there are also a lot of people of color that do this as well. So like they're not only focusing on like people like minority victims, they're also focusing on like minority perpetrators too. So yeah, there's also like a lot of drama with the Sword and Scale podcast, so that's a whole nother episode. I could go on for days. I just like join these groups and read things. So
do you even do work?
Yes, I do this while I'm like, I don't know when I do this. I do this when I'm home.
Do you even do work? So anyway, after your awesome 10-minute story time.
You asked! I told you. Like, there was an actual, like, term, like, series of events that led to the host being blamed for stuff. And I thought that it was justified.
Anyways, is there any last thoughts you have before I wrap this up?
I'm not crazy. And
only maybe like 75% of the time. And you can guess which is that means crazy or not crazy.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we've talked about a lot of stuff. I have a lot of serial killer knowledge in my head. Ultimately, I do want to do a crossover episode with some like a true crime podcaster for a Selena crossover episode. So I'm gonna try to get that in the works, because I do want to talk about her actual death, because it's like really important. Like, had she not run away, she would have survived, because she bled out because the adrenaline pumped all the blood out of her body because she was running to get away from the gun. Also, she was killed with hollow point bullets. Thanks, Texas. But yeah.
Anyways, is that your final thought for this episode?
That's my final thought for this. My final thought for this episode is all the stuff I'm going to do in future episodes.
Got it.
And I do want to have a spin-off true crime podcast, so.
Go call him.
I'll call Bryce. I need to see if he's still alive.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Do you have any final thoughts?
Nope. We already wrapped this bad boy up. We're already way over time. I'd like to thank Brianna again for coming on and doing this lovely episode with us. So everybody feel free. It doesn't say in the thing if you're watching this on Twitch or YouTube. But this is episode 25, True Crime, for the But Why Though podcast. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. As always, been your host, Matt. You can find me on Twitter if you're not watching this but listening at DATM18, DATTM18. And you can find all of our podcast stuff so you can be involved either in the other side of the wormhole or just feel like messaging Kate so she can talk to you all day on Twitter. But Why Though PC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And come check out our website, butwhythoughpodcast.com. And where can people find you at, Kate, so they can all at you about your lovely conversations?
It's not just true crime. I also talk about why Gamora is fucking important, and y'all need to recognize her. You can find me at ohmymythrandir on Twitter, Instagram, and then we're getting new PCs. Yay, upgrades. So I'll be streaming again at twitch.tv/ohmymythrandir. Yeah, I like interacting with people. I think as a podcast, we're starting to get more fan interaction, more listener interaction. I don't want to say fan, listener interaction, and we really like it. So at any of us at the podcast, we definitely want to have conversations like this in real time.
They all at you. Me and Adrian just stand here. We just stand here and look pretty.
I'm talkative.
We know.
Well, at least y'all are party.
That's our goal. All right. Thanks, everybody, and hopefully we'll be here again next time, or check out one of the older ones. Bye.
Bye.